Great. Well, good morning and welcome, everybody. I'm Tony Lemieux, the founding co-director of the Atlanta Global Studies Center from Georgia State University. And I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to this morning's event, Future of Global Diplomacy Around the World in the Biden Era. I'm here on behalf of the Atlanta Global Studies Center. This is the week of our symposium, which is one of our signature events. The Atlanta Global Studies Center is really here to empower the region's global agenda, to build international awareness, global competence, to support and foster advanced language and culture ability, to build capacity in higher education, to promote public and private partnerships, and really work across sectors. And so this event, I think, is a wonderful, kind of proof of the kind of collaboration, the kind of work that we do in terms of putting together the kind of programming that we're able to offer today. And the guests here, I think a special thanks to our colleagues and collaborators, the Center for Human Rights and Democracy, the Center for Latino and Latina Studies at Georgia State University as well, the Center for Hellenic Studies, Middle East Studies Center, and Asian Studies Center, all have been integral in today's programming in putting this together. And I'd also like to provide thanks to the World Affairs Council. So Charles Shapiro helped in terms of making some of the introductions to Ambassador Blay. And so it takes a team to really put something like this together. And so it's an honor for everyone to be here. Before we begin the program, I'd like to just ask a couple of quick housekeeping things. Keep your mics muted. It'll help on the background noise, and because we're recording, we want to make sure that we don't have things sort of interrupting if we can at all avoid it. We will have time for question and answer, but please do feel free to type questions into the chat along the way. We'll be working to compile those and pull points together as we can to facilitate the discussion. And with that, I will introduce our panelists. Our first speaker and panelist is the new Consul of Greece in Atlanta, Theodoros Dimopoulos. He led Atlanta's bicentennial celebration of Greek independence last month. His interests are in building businesses, travel, student exchange, research between Georgia and Greece as we recover from the pandemic. Mr. Dimopoulos studied international and European studies at the University of Paris, and then went on to earn a master's in security and defense in France. So I was very interested in his background in security, so we'll hopefully hear a little bit more about that. 2017, he was selected for the Defense and Diplomacy Leadership Program at Tufts University, and he took up a post in Moscow that same year where he served as consul and deputy head of mission until 2020. So welcome to you, Theodore. Next, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Carlos Henrique de Abreu, career diplomat who assumed the post of Consul General at the Consulate of Brazil in Atlanta, December of 2018. Before his arrival in Atlanta, Mr. Abreu was Consul General of Brazil in Sydney, Australia, but has been here in the US fairly extensively. The Atlanta role is his fourth posting in the US, but his first time in leading a consulate. He previously served in the early 90s as Deputy Consul General in San Francisco, and has served 2 stints in the Brazilian Embassy in Washington, the latest one ending in 2013 after 6 years as Minister Counselor. Graduate of Brazil's diplomatic academies with courses in economic sciences and politics, Mr. Abreu spent 2 separate postings in the Brazilian Embassy in Buenos Aires, as well as in La Paz, Bolivia. He's published articles around currency issues in Argentina and the effects of rising US interest rates on the world. So welcome, Ambassador. Next, I'd like to welcome Ambassador Louise Blay. She's the Acting Consul General of Canada to the Southeast US. Ambassador Blay just completed an assignment at Canada's permanent mission to the United Nations, where she led Canada's implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in New York, during which time she also served on UNICEF's executive board. Ambassador Blay began her professional career as an art theft analyst at Interpol, which it sounds incredibly fascinating to me. She managed the development program at the National Archives of Canada from 1992 to 96 before joining the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in 96. In 2014, The Minister of Foreign Affairs appointed her Consul General of Canada in Atlanta, covering North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. So that regional perspective. And she's back in Atlanta promoting bilateral relations between Canada and the Southeast US. So we're really grateful to have her here with us today. So to begin our discussion, I'd like to start by just hearing a little bit from each of our panelists about their background, to provide some opening remarks, to share about their background, what roads led here to Atlanta. I certainly, see a little bit of that in the bio, but to get a sense of what sort of things really brought you here, what issues are most sort of pressing to you, and then we'll start to kind of follow with a little bit more of a focused discussion. So let me start with you, Mr. Dimopoulos.
Good morning. Thank you, Tony. It is an honor for me to be here with such distinguished guests and such experienced diplomats and colleagues. Thank you very much. I started my diplomatic career in 2015. I joined the Foreign Service in 2015. The first directorate which I was posted was the Directorate for Relations with Russia and former CIS countries. It comes a little bit because of my academic background. After I finished my master's degree, I was in pursuit of a PhD with the main focus on the Eurasian security regime. So I was more focused in Eurasia and post-communist Asia, actually, in my fields of expertise. And then I moved on to the office of the Secretary General of the Foreign Ministry. And then, as you said, I was chosen for this advanced leadership and diplomacy program in Tufts University. Then I got posted in Moscow for 3.5 years. I was Consul Deputy Head of Mission, which was my first posting abroad. It was quite an experience. It was really good because I had a chance to put my studies, let's say, to the test. I more or less worked on what I have studied for a long period of time. And then I made the transition coming here in Atlanta, US. I'm new here as well. It's my roughly fifth month here. And it is really nice that I have the chance to be with all of you here and discussing about politics and policy issues with the new administration, with such a pivotal actor such as the U.S. I think that's pretty sums it up for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And let me turn to you next, Ambassador Blay.
Thank you very, very much, Tony. As Theodoros said, I'm just very delighted to be here. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to Charles Shapiro for making that connection, since I basically just arrived back. My entire career, diplomatic career, was based on bilateral relations. So I've been posted first in Washington, then Tokyo, and then Paris. And then came down in Atlanta again, and bilateral relations, which was really the bread and butter of my career. So when I was asked to go to the UN, actually I was responsible for the SDG implementation, but I was also responsible for Canada's bid for the Security Council seat. I'm sure everyone here knows that there are 5 permanent members on the Security Council and 10 elected seats. It's definitely dépassé and an anachronism. It shouldn't be structured that way, but that's the UN we still have, and Canada was vying for one of the seats for what we call WEOG, which is the European region, and others. The others being, and that's and I want to explain that a little bit because it explains the way the multilateral system is built, and Canada is associated with Europe along with even though we're a North American country, along with New Zealand, Australia, and Israel. So it's a little bit odd because the other regions are much more geographically organized. And we ended up not being successful in that bid. Ireland and Norway were, for a whole variety of reasons. But that experience at the UN, both working on the campaign and working to advance the multilateral agenda, and in the midst of the pandemic, has really given me a much broader perspective. And as I return to the Southeast US at my request for a little bit before I ship out again, I'm able to apply that bigger context to the Canada-US relationship. And at this time, I'm struck by the fact that no one country or no one region can do it, go at it alone. We're all in this together. We're affected by conflicts across, all the way on the other side of the world. We here in the United States, you're deeply affected by the economic crisis in Latin America, which is driving the immigration problem that you have at the Mexican border. So everything is kind of global. And so now in my conversations here with elected officials, I'm able to bring this piece. And the other piece, I'll close with that. And I'd love if we could touch on it a little bit as part of this conversation, but is China's growing influence internationally. I certainly saw it at the UN. We're seeing now they're much more emboldened attitude towards their own region, including, of course, Taiwan, and the way they dealt with the Hong Kong demonstrations, I think, give us a little bit of a glimpse of what we could be facing and how those kinds of tensions might affect the supply chains and our access to essential goods here in North America. So I think there's a lot to discuss there. It may not, if we could touch on it today, it'd be great, but otherwise I think it might be worth even a whole other conversation, because I think we're going to have to prepare for some of those shock waves in the next few years post-pandemic. So I'll end there, Tony. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and that's a great introduction, and certainly I like the food for thought and bringing that topic in. So we'll try to make some time for that, because I know there is going to be some interest there. Ambassador Abreu, what about your background and areas you see as sort of the most sort of pressing and critical?
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, first of all, to join this distinguished panel. I have many years, in reality, of US relations, as you mentioned. This is my fourth posting in the US. And before, I was also director for the United States, Canada, and Inter-American Affairs, basically the OAS and the Summit of the Americas process. And I was there for 4 years, I'm sorry. And among other important tasks, I played an active role in preparing the then US President's visit to Brazil, Barack Obama. And I have many friends, of course, here in the US, in the State Department. And it's so good to see my old friends in key positions now. It's so nice, and I wish them the best, really. And but I have also experience in WTO. I was NAMA negotiator. NAMA is non-agricultural market access in the Doha round, and for almost 3 years. And I negotiated also some bilateral agreements with China, with the European Union also under that capacity. And before that, it's interesting. I have some experience too in our regional integration process. And I was, imagine, a note taker when Mercosur was negotiated. I was a young third secretary. And I was a second secretary in our embassy in Buenos Aires. And I have fond memories of those days, really. And but what has brought me back to the US, to Atlanta? I truly believe in the US-Brazil relationship. We have almost 200-year partnership. And the US was the first country to recognize our independence, and we share so many interest, really, with the US. And I really think that the best is yet to come in these relations. And I'm happy to be here in Atlanta. It's a very dynamic, it has a partner of Brazil, the Southeast states. Just to give you an idea, if, well, under my jurisdiction, I have Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And if these 5 American states happen to be, theoretically, an independent country, together, they would rank in the 14th place among Brazil's most important trading partners, right between France and Canada. So that's a lot. And we have more than 44 companies investing in Atlanta, creating jobs here, and about 32, 33 are located in Georgia, and many here in Atlanta. So I feel very comfortable here, and I'm looking forward to continue to develop or contribute somehow to see this huge potential between our relations be untapped. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, you know, you raised some really critical points, especially with the economic, you know, the sort of trade relationships and the level of investment and the kind of relationships that this region, you know, has. And I think, you know, although we see that, you know, specifically as an area of focus, I don't think it's as well known, you know, broadly in the United States, just how much is really going on in this particular region. So another point we can come back to. What I'd like to do is pivot our conversation now to a little bit more of developing some of these ideas and the substance. And we talked a little bit about this before this session, but I'd love to, you know, ask each of you to just spend a few minutes, you know, talking about the kind of challenges or issues that are facing your country today, where U.S. diplomacy matters the most. You know, where are the things that are sort of the most significant from your perspective? And I think we can, you know, open it up. So if whoever would like to take this one first, or I can call, but I would love to. Yeah, please, Ambassador Blay.
Thank you, Tony. I'm happy to jump in here. I think it's a great question. And Carlos, I think, pointed to the importance of the integrated relationship economically. So what that brings on in terms of challenges and opportunities for Canada right now is twofold. One is the pandemic management, and I'll include post-pandemic economic recovery. And the other one, of course, is climate change. And so on the first one, I have to say we have really worked closely with the United States to manage the border issues, to allow during the pandemic the flow of legitimate goods and people through the border, while at the same time limiting travel, non-essential travel. So that took a great deal of collaboration to make sure that the supply chain were not disrupted, because when you impose quarantine with truck drivers, you start having all sorts of issues. So there was a great deal of working hand in hand. And so that was, I would say, quite successful. On the pandemic economic recovery, that story is being told now. But I'm very pleased that President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau developed a roadmap, North America roadmap, and we are now in the implementation phase of that. So we will work really closely in making sure that we bounce back, and we'll build, the cliche, but it's still true, that we build back better. There's an opportunity here to apply some of the lessons that we have learned through the pandemic, so that we do things in a better way, and we do it in a greener way. And so that takes me to my last point, which is, of course, on climate change, which is really the biggest, probably along with the pandemic, the biggest challenge of our generation. And we're very pleased to see that the Biden administration is upping its ambition when it comes to curbing emission and financing green technology and development. Yesterday, as you know, was Earth Day. There were other announcements made, and Canada made our own as well. So I have to say, we have now, again, in the United States, a partner in the implementation of some of the important steps that we will have to take to make sure that our planet continues to be viable for generations to come. I'll end there. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yep. Yes, Ambassador Abreu.
Oh, my mic was not mute, I'm sorry. Well, as our Minister of Foreign Affairs has said, Ambassador Carlos Alberto Franco França, Brazil is facing three urgent challenges, right? The health challenge or urgency, an economic urgency, and a sustainable development urgency. From the Brazilian perspective, a close relationship and partnership with the US is critical to address each and every one of these three urgent challenges. On health, the United States plays a key role in R&D and in the production of vaccines and medicines against the coronavirus. I would like to thank the American government for its steadfast and ongoing assistance to mitigate the health and socio-economic impacts of COVID-19, including delivery of 1,000 ventilators to the people of Brazil. Of the around 5,600 million doses of vaccines against COVID-19 already bought by Brazil, almost 140 million are coming from American suppliers, Pfizer and Janssen. But I would like also to highlight our expectation that when the time comes the American population has been taken care of, the US will be able to give to Brazil and other countries in need access to its vaccine surplus. On the economy, the United States is the main partner of Brazil, first source of direct investment and technology, second only to China in trade, and first destination of Brazilian manufactured goods. And I would like to highlight here that the Southeast Atlantic region of the United States does have a comparative advantage in manufacturing, but I'll come back to that later. We have advanced considerably in our bilateral partnership in the recent past. Last October, for instance, we signed a mini trade deal comprised in 3 chapters: trade facilitation, good regulatory practices, and anti-corruption measures. It's a good stepping stone for a more ambitious trade agreement between Brazil and the United States, and an idea that is supported by the business community of both countries. Another one is a tax treaty, an agreement to avoid double taxation. Brazil is still is one of the most closed economies in the world, and there are plenty of low-hanging fruits before us and our partners. We see the United States of America as a key source of trade, investment, innovation, economic growth, and job creation. On the environment, well, the United States plays a key role in the world transition to lower carbon energy sources. As we all know, CO2 emissions are the major cause of global warming and climate change. Brazil accounts for about 3% of total global carbon emissions. The participation of Brazil in the Leaders Summit on Climate on April 22, yesterday, I think it's still taking place, right, the summit, called by President Joe Biden, and the concrete pledges put forth by President Jair Bolsonaro reaffirm our commitment to promoting sustainable development. President Bolsonaro made announcements, raised Brazil's ambition and indicated next steps to help solve the climate problem. Brazil pledged to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, advancing in 10 years the previous deadline. Brazil reinforces its commitment to eliminate illegal deforestation and to reduce carbon emissions by 50% until 2030. To that end, and despite present severe budgetary constraints, our environmental agencies will be further strengthened and funds allocated to enforcement actions shall increase by twofold. In order to be fair and effective, we also need to improve the living standard of more than 23 million Brazilians who live in the Amazon, one of the richest regions of the world, but with the worst human development index in Brazil. We need truly to value standing forests and biodiversity by turning the bioeconomy into a reality and by taking due account of the needs and experience of our indigenous and traditional communities. Cooperation will be key and instrumental for our success in this crucial endeavor, particularly from the private sector, institutions, people, and other partners in Brazil and around the world. We see this year and the COP26 process as an opportunity, a great opportunity, among other goals, to create carbon markets envisaged in the Paris Agreement, so as to have sustained financial resources to boost climate action. Brazil is looking forward to increase and enhance cooperation with the United States and international community on sustainable development, a concept that combines both an environmental agenda with economic and social development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, it definitely, I think, sets a stage for something I want to follow up on momentarily. Mr. Dimopoulos, what about from your perspective?
Thank you. I've listened carefully to both the ambassador's remarks, and speaking from this part of the Atlantic, I would like to make a shift in geopolitics and security, which are more or less main issues in our neighborhood. So in general, our foreign policy is forged on the basis, Greece's foreign policy is forged on the basis of two constants and three main variants. It's 2+1 actually. So the two constants, it's respect to international law and treaties and the principles set from the UN Charter, and multilateralism and cooperation is an effective vehicle to create synergies and overcome tensions. Now on the variants, we have changing and evolving dynamics of world politics involving global powers and the equilibrium of power among them, such as US, Russia, China, and the EU, of course, mainly in terms of economic cooperation. Now, speaking as a Greek and from the southernmost edge of the Mediterranean, we are witnessing growing instability and turmoil in NATO's southern flank. If we take a look at the map, we can visualize, I would call it a crescent of instability, which stretches from Mashrek up to Donbass in Ukraine. If we take a look at the map, we see, for example, Libya. It's a source of unrest. We see Syria. It's a source of unrest for years now, almost a decade. Then we have Nagorno-Karabakh in the Azeri-Armenian border, and recently we have also Donbass in Ukraine. On the other hand, and this is the +1 variant because it's a positive one, we have positive developments in the Near East. It's Near East for us, Greece, Middle East, you can call it, both through the Abraham Accords, but through growing cooperation between Greece and like-minded neighboring countries such as Cyprus, Israel, Egypt, recently the United Arab Emirates, through formats like the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, the Philia Forum, and the most prominent format so far, which is the trilateral cooperation format between Greece, Cyprus, and Israel. In total, Greece has proven its dedication to promoting peace and good neighborly relations on the basis of international law, especially when in 2020 we reached agreements on the delimitation over exclusive economic zones and continental shelves with Italy and Egypt. To this end, given Greece's dedication to the aforementioned principles, the fact that it is a NATO ally and a full EU member state, Greece bears the characteristics of an anchor state for cooperation and promotion of US interests as well, both with Greece's and EU, of course, in the region. Consequently, a basic format of cooperation with the US that we're looking forward to further enhance and deepen is our strategic dialogue, which is pivotal for multifaceted cooperations in the domains of defense, security, law enforcement, counterterrorism, trade and investment, energy, and people-to-people contacts. Moreover, I would like to focus that in terms of security that I spoke a while ago. Greece has been a NATO and a US ally, and it is a country consistently abiding to spending at least 2% of its GDP on defense. On a quantitative basis, in 2019, Greece, despite a reduction in its defense spending, was still over 2%, at 2.28%. This makes for an increased value as a country and as a NATO ally in the region, in a very tumultuous region, as I described, and designates Greece not just as a consumer of security, but also as a guarantor in the region. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That I think leads to some really interesting points, and also some kind of variation around some of those core themes that we can, lean into a little bit, that I think are important. And so I'd love for us to be able to follow up a little bit, especially I think this next question might lend to that a little bit, but it was really, interesting to hear your perspectives. What I'd like to ask now is to kind of drill a little bit deeper into this, to think about like how your country's diplomacy towards the U.S. may change or shift or not, moving from the Trump administration to the Biden administration. I think, that was one of the questions that a lot of us, had, was what will be different, what will have some degree of continuity. One of the things that, over the course of the Trump administration, we saw, a lot of what appeared to be, some shifting in terms of priorities, even the sort of posturing and such. So I'd love to get your sense on what things, kind of have been stable underneath all of the sort of surface, the things we, see sort of reported on or tweeted about back when that was a thing, in terms of how our international relations sometimes got put forth, at least from the presidential level, and to really get a sense of those similarities or differences moving from one administration to the next. And given that we're a few months into the Biden administration, just to sort of see where that's started to prove out in a more material sense.
Ladies first. Yeah.
Whoever would like to jump in, we're.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm always happy to jump in. And I'll be very brief, because I'm sure my distinguished colleagues will have much to add. And I think Theodoros did talk about some of the conflicts that are lurking out there. So that's definitely an issue that will test the new Biden administration. But what I can say from my own vantage point about the differences, let's start with those. They've been tremendously important. At the UN, I was able to see the stark difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, even though I left just recently. And it's clear that the new administration has much more multilateralist approach to world issues compared to the previous. The previous administration was rather skeptical, if not distrusting, of the multilateral apparatus. They felt for not necessarily for wrong reasons, but they saw mostly the flaws of the architecture we now have, and not enough of the positive. Whereas the new administration, I think, is definitely re-engaging in a much more, allow me to say, I have to choose my words very carefully here. but in a much more of a collaborative approach, whereas the Trump administration was very much not afraid to act alone if it had to for things that it firmly believed in. And that's okay, and you can do this when you're a superpower, but it's not ideal. At the UN, no one tries to do anything on their own. You always try to have like-minded along with you. It's badly seen in a way to push an agenda that is only country specific. That's the whole point. Our world order now is based on collaboration, alliances, and so when those are not exercised, it does make a huge difference. Now, we'll have to wait and see the differences with the Chinese engagement with China. It's too early to tell on that file. Iran, we have the impression that the US administration will want to re-engage in some form of talks. I would say that is different than the previous administration. And same with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict issue. I think it's a bit early, but I get the impression that probably the Biden administration will not want to lean in as much as the Trump administration did in that area. And on Ukraine, as we talked about, and Russia, that is also, I think we can expect quite a different approach to Russia than the previous administration. So in terms of Canada, just to close, we had a successful and positive relationship with the Trump administration. We were able to renegotiate NAFTA into what now we refer to as CUSMA, by USMCA, which is a modernized version of NAFTA, which is better and more adapted to the world we live in today. So that's a positive. As I mentioned before, we managed the border extremely well during the pandemic with the previous administration, and we've now off to an excellent start with the new Biden administration. I pointed to some of the work that's already been done following the summit between our two leaders a few weeks ago. So I'll close there. Hopefully that was interesting and helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much.
Oh, may I?
Yes.
Theodoros, may I? Thank you. As has already been stressed by the White House and the Department of State spokespersons, the 2-century-old partnership between Brazil and the US has been and remains today important to both our nations and to our hemisphere. And here I would like to highlight that I think that Latin America is one of the most peaceful regions in the world, and perhaps our hemisphere too. This is important when we take, especially when we consider what the situation is in other continents, as highlighted by my Greek colleague. But besides being united by friendly ties with an interrupted history of almost 200 years, Brazil and the US share the fundamental values of liberty, human rights, and economic freedom. Our soldiers in the Second World War fought together, side by side in Italy, to free that country from fascism. Both countries also share a whole array of bilateral agreements and political commitments in numerous areas. I think the US-Brazil relations are so institutionalized. We have dialogues and mechanisms to deal with with any subject, really, in all subjects in a way. And our common history, shared values, and the sound institutional framework, as I was telling you, allow us for the permanent strengthening of our bilateral relations. And Brazil is committed to further strengthening our strategic and deep-rooted partnership it's interesting. Well, I joined Itamaraty, or Minister of Foreign Affairs, back in the 80s. Brazil became a democracy in that decade. I mean, we once again became a democracy. And since then, the relationship between Brazil and the US has just been growing, enhancing, and acquiring more substance. And this trend is here to stay, independent really from parties in government, individuals. For instance, President Lula and President Bush had a very good chemistry, although with very different backgrounds. And in those days, we began a partnership on biofuels and renewable energy, which is still there today. And then later on, when President Obama went to Brazil, it was a very successful visit. I really invite you, for those who have interest in our bilateral relations, to read the presidential statement that came out from that visit. And now, more recently, President Trump and President Bolsonaro have had a very good relationship. And but anyway, as a result of high-level interactions between Brazilian and American authorities at present, such as the exchange of letters between President Bolsonaro and Biden, also our Minister of Foreign Affairs had exchanged letters and also had video conferences with Anthony Blinken, right, U.S. Secretary of State, with Ambassador also, with John Kerry, the climate change, right, envoy. But we are currently working on a prospective agenda that is focused on, but not limited to, key issues for both countries, such as the protection of the environment, the promotion of trade and investment, the strengthening of our defense partnership, the exploration of new areas of collaboration in science and technology, and the defense of democracy and rule of law in the hemisphere. Brazil also views the US as a major partner in supporting the succession to the OECD, in reforming the WTO system and other multilateral institutions, and of course, in promoting sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think there, again, we see the sort of continuities, so that there are sort of these long things. And I know that to be the case with Greece as well. I'd love to hear, Theodoros, from your perspective about that sort of relationship and what sort of changes or continuities there have been in sort of the diplomacy between the US and Greece, and if you see that sort of with continuity or shift, or where those differences may be.
Sure. I would like to start first from an EU perspective on this, and I think that it will be really fruitful if, with the new cooperation, we would reinvigorate the transatlantic community. I mean, trade and commerce, overcoming whatever EU-US trade issues have sprung up during the last few years. I mean, like taxes and duties on steel, aluminum, the Boeing Airbus issue, and trying to settle this in accordance with international law and mutual benefit as a priority. It is very important as well with the new administration. It's let's say re-engagement in multilateral formats and organizations, and it is also a very nice initiative that the new administration's decision to rejoin the climate agreement and appointing former Secretary of State Kerry as the EU's special envoy for climate, because a country such as the US is needed for climate change. Now, on a bilateral basis, we're a long-standing ally and partner of the US, and we constantly aim higher with each administration. So our approach and relations are not administration-based, but rather try to exploit the full potential for partnership out of each administration. At the moment, the reiteration of US interest and presence in the Eastern Mediterranean is something of great interest for Greece. Our regional cooperation formats have also been crucial in advancing US footprint in the Eastern Mediterranean. We have a very important and already robust defense cooperation, which is a top priority for Greece in order to meet both security challenges and threats while promoting stability and peace in the greater region. We had the new amendment for mutual defense cooperation agreement starting in the 1990s with renewals that instilled a new vigor in our robust partnership. And we're looking, of course, forward to upgrading it further. We are aiming also toward an increased energy cooperation. We will have ExxonMobil that will conduct explorations southwest of Crete. And we also run projects to turn northern Greece into an energy hub. There is also a strong US interest in the East Med pipeline project. Last but not least, of course, which was postponed due to the pandemic and is scheduled to take place during, I think, fall 2021, is the continuation of our third strategic dialogue starting from 2018. And which will set the pace for our continued and increased cooperation with the US, both regionally but internationally as well.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to stick with you, Theodore, for a moment here as we sort of pivot a little bit. You know, one of the things that we had shared, you know, in preparation for this session was this, what I thought was an interesting Politico article that my colleague Diana found that talked about climate change as a, you know, threat. And that's something that has certainly been discussed and a real focal point for policy. And in this article that we shared, it suggested that the Biden's climate summit took on the, quote, air of a welcome home party for the US return to the international climate change, rather than a substantive negotiating session that would really lead to breakthrough and action. And I wanted to get each of your reactions to that. I know, you know, that this is really one of those critical areas, but that needs to be met with substance and action. And so, what would you say to that sort of that casting of this sort of, hey, you know, we're back, you know, more of a party atmosphere than a let's roll up our sleeves and get the work done atmosphere? Is that at all a fair sort of characterization?
Jumping in again. I'm sorry to be doing that, dear colleagues. I'll be again just to start off the conversation. So there is already a formal process for negotiation on climate. It's the COP process, and the British are leading the next COP, and so that is where experts get together and go into the nitty-gritty of a very complex issue. I think that the summit was very important, though, to set the tone and provide in advance of the next COP negotiation a bit of a flavor of where everyone stands, including the United States, because there is such a difference in position. So when leaders get together at such a high level, just that in itself sends a message. Like a great Canadian once said, medium is the message, Marsha McLuhan. So I think it was very important. It garnered a lot of attention. You had the world paying attention to it. And now experts will be that much more motivated to enter the next round of negotiations and in the next COP with that momentum having been created. So I think it was worthwhile, and understanding how diplomatic and how things shift, you know, from leaders to our level. I think it was a very, very positive step, and Canada welcomed it.
Thank you. Theodore, let me go to you, and then next to Carlos, just to sort of get your take on this.
Yes, it is, of course, a very it is a positive move. It is a positive sign. It is an initiative that was needed. But and I will try to be laconic on this. You know, we're late. in general. Action needs to be done now. I mean, to meet the 1.5 or 2 degrees maximum target of temperature rise as designated by the Paris Agreement, greenhouse emissions must have started 7.6% decrease from 2020. That was last year. And we're here today. I understand that these are all positive initiatives, but this is a collective effort that needs attention and immediate actions. It is a good start. I hope that it will again use this momentum, and in the coming years we will come and months actually we will come with a comprehensive approach on all this.
Great, thank you. So, and what I'm hearing so far is, you know, that it was great to have that sense of okay, we're back in the game, but now really like getting to the action. And Ambassador Abreu, I'd love to get your take on this as well.
Well, in reality, I could make mine the word Louise and Theodoros' words, really. I think very two fair statements that I think they made. Look, but what can I say? This summit, I think it was very important from a political perspective to draw attention of world leaders to the pressing needs of climate change. We need to act now. Really, really. There's no, and it will pave the way. We truly hope for a successful COP26 process. As you know, Brazil has invested so much in this area. We hosted the 2 most important international conferences on sustainability in history. The United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, known as the 1992 Earth Summit, and the United Nations Conference on Sustained Development, Rio +20. Brazil signed the Paris Agreement in 2016. Brazil has also been an active part of in the Green Climate Fund, the GCF, the main operational entity of the financial mechanism of the Paris Agreement. Brazil, as you know, is the country in the world with the highest production of energy from renewable resources, 40%, renewable sources, I'm sorry, compared to an average of less than 20% for the rest of the world. In terms of electricity, Brazil already meets 83% of its needs from renewable means, which with one of the lowest carbon electricity matrices in the world. Brazil is a pioneer in the use of biofuels such as ethanol, which helps to significantly reduce pollution in our urban centers. Most of our cars are dual fuel, so they can use ethanol and gasoline. Science and technology investments and other public policies have enabled Brazil to become a world leader in sustainable agriculture. Just to give you an idea, between 1976 and 2016, production increased by 400%, while the area cultivation grew by only 33%. In the case of beef, production between 1990 and 2018 increased by 140%, while the area for cattle grazing decreased by 15%. Moreover, Brazil would like to become a full member of the OECD and of its 290 agreements, 40% of which are environment related, and to implement the Mercosur European Trade Agreement and its environmental provisions. Global governance really must rise to the occasion, and that's why this summit called by President Joe Biden It's so important in order to ensure, right, that the new international system, which will be different from the one we had until recently, brings both prosperity, of course, liberty, promotes the market economy, but also sustainable development. And Brazil is looking forward to playing its role in the process and in engaging with the world, the US and its all partners. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. So what I'd like to do now, mindful of the time, and I want to open it up to audience questions shortly, but I do want to ask each of you to sort of, we've talked sort of in the big, thinking about things sort of at a broader level, but what I'd like to do is sort of bring back some of our focus to Atlanta and our sort of, purpose here and think a little bit about the importance of Atlanta in the region you represent. So understanding that, you're talking about, the Southeast as well, but just to think about the importance of Atlanta to respective countries and to think about that not only in economic terms, but cultural terms or other sort of dimensions on which we might really gauge the importance of that region and relationship. And let me start with Theodore on this one. He is relatively new here, right?
Yeah, sure.
5 months in.
It's I will start from a more let's say romantic aspect of our relations with Atlanta, which can if we elaborate on this, we can lead us down to business. I mean, between Greece and Atlanta, we share first of all a relationship due to the Olympics. It was Atlanta that let's say stole the Olympics from us, 1996. Okay, we hosted them back in 2004, but the spirit of athleticism that the Olympics are about is still true, and we share a sister cities commission between Atlanta and ancient Olympia, Greece, which is the birthplace of the Olympics, where the ancient Olympics emanated from. And from this, we can start using our heavy industry. Let's say that for us, this is tourism and shipping. The port of Savannah is performing outstandingly well during at least this year. So we would like to explore on opportunities to set up shipping opportunities with shipping authorities in Greece and here in Georgia. And of course, with tourism, I will be hosting my Minister of Tourism today in visits here and in various formats. So I think that there is lots of potential. We have not made use of it to the full from our part, but we're here to exploit the most of it in the coming years, at least during my tenure. I can guarantee you this.
Great, thank you. Ambassador Blay, what about your sense of here? You've had previous experience in Atlanta, recently back. What about your sense of that sort of importance of Atlanta, the relationship of Atlanta and the Southeast in context of the relationship with Canada?
Well, what I would say, Tony, that has evolved in that time frame is the attention that obviously our trade with the region is enormous. It rivals that we have with entire countries around the world. So, but beyond that, and a number of Canadians that are here and active in the community and growing, one of the areas that has seen explosive growth that attracts a great deal of Canadians is the film industry. And I'm proud to say that the film and television production industry is actually the incentives and the way that the Atlanta built and attracted all that film production was on the blueprint of what Canada did the decade prior to attract filming in both in BC and Ontario in particular. And so we're glad that we were, I guess copy is the best form of flattery, and it's been extremely successful for Atlanta. And of course, there's a lot of Canadians that are involved in the industry, and they're present here as well. So that has been a big change. The other one that I would note, and this one is is not a surprise at all, but I would say that it used to be when I was here last, I would have to constantly remind Canadians and the business sector and the political sector how important Atlanta was and the greater Atlanta region for a whole variety of reasons. But in the South, it was a leader in many ways. Well, now with the last election and what the flip of the state, both with the two Senate races that flipped from Republican to Democrat, and of course the presidential election issue, and all of that, what the attention that garnered, put Atlanta very much at the forefront of Canadians in general, looking at the city as a growing, changing demographically, and becoming more and more internationally connected. And there's a great deal now of curiosity and interest in the region. People like Stacey Abrams are household names in Canada. I mean, that wouldn't have been the case even just 2 years ago. So Canadians are looking at Atlanta as leading the way in terms of social and demographic changes, and there's a great deal of interest in that.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that I think is, I wondered about that in particular, like how some of the things that are sort of a national focus, when we found ourselves in the national news, how much of that sort of garnered international attention as well, because it was really sort of a pivotal moment in US politics in particular. So that's interesting to hear. Ambassador Abreu, what about from your perspective, the importance of Atlanta and for economic, cultural others? I know you've spoken on, you've touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to see if there's any other, specifics regionally that you might hone in on.
Yes. Well, in a way, I would like to speak on behalf of other Latin American countries, but truly, I don't have a mandate from my colleagues to do that, except to say, of course, that we have a large Latin American community here in Atlanta, in this region of the US and Georgia. And they're good citizens, orderly, hardworking, and many of them are students, right? At the universities here and so on and so forth. Of course, that Rio de Janeiro and Atlanta have many things in common, but one of them, as we hosted, right, Olympic Games in the past, and we are very proud of it. And Rio and Atlanta are sister cities. We have an amazing relationship with local governments here, states, and particularly with the city of Atlanta. They're so engaged. They're always sending missions to Brazil to promote our relations. And actually, there is a growing interest on the part, and I'll speak on behalf of my country, please, in this region of the United States, a growing interest for many reasons. And one of them, it's a natural hub for the US. It has a wonderful infrastructure, right? And it's very competitive. It's less expensive to open a business here than other important cities of the United States. And as I told you about the importance of Atlanta in terms of Brazilian investment, but let me highlight here, the trade is very dynamic. It has grown from $4.7 to $6 billion in the last 10 years, a growth rate of almost 30%, well above the 25% growth rate of total trade in goods between Brazil and the United States as a whole. And trade between Brazil and Georgia is particularly dynamic, with a growth rate of above 60% in the last 10 years, jumping to almost $3 billion. Investment figures are also very impressive. I don't know if you're aware, but the United States is still by far the main investor in Brazil, with a total of $145 billion in FDI. but Brazilian investment in the US increased by 350% in the last 10 years, reaching almost 35 billion and supporting the creation of more than 80,000 jobs in the United States. We have our economy has a very diverse profile. Our companies here are invested in sectors such as apparel, construction material, chemicals, plastics, steel, electric engines, machinery, power transformers, aircraft, fintech, cooperation between Atlanta and Brazil in the area of fintech has a great potential. Information technology, artificial technology, and also in agriculture. Our relationship is a two-way street, benefiting both countries with fair trade in a healthy investment environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, one of the things that really struck me, and I alluded to this, earlier, but just the level of investment and the kind of opportunities, just the sort of, growth. And it's great to hear about particular areas and industries and relationships that are building. So I appreciate that. What I'd like to do now, I'd like to ask, the audience to get engaged here. I see one question coming in addition to UN Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate action, which of the other SDGs are priorities for your country? And how does diplomacy facilitate meeting those goals? How has the pandemic disrupted or changed efforts to meet those goals? So that's one of the questions coming in. So there's a lot in there, but I'd love to see who'd like to tackle that. And it's in the chat box as well, if you are able to see that.
Anyone volunteers? No. Ladies first.
Again, okay, well, I'm happy. I'm particularly happy to answer this question, given my attention to the SDGs, and doubly so because I think the one that is a priority for Canada is also the one that is most at risk because of the pandemic. It's SDG 5, gender equality. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has set us back internationally with the achievement of SDG 5. Everyone's frozen, so I hope you are hearing me. Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. Good. So, what COVID-19 did, unfortunately, is that it has disproportionately affected women around the world. From an economic point of view, the sectors that have had the biggest impact have been those where women operate in. And second, it has the fact that children have not been able to go to school, has disproportionately put the burden on women at home. And very, very sadly, we are seeing now an uptick in early child and early enforced marriage, where we had made some gains in the past. Because when you have economic trouble, girls get married off as a way to help the family and really for the girl's survival. The other uptick that we're seeing around the world, unfortunately, is domestic violence. As women are stuck at home with their aggressor, we're seeing around the world an increase in domestic violence, and we're seeing as well greater sexual harassment and sexual attacks on women all around the world, and has been seen recently, unfortunately, in refugee camps and in places where we had gotten a handle on part of the problem. So Canada has a feminist foreign policy. It also has a feminist development policy. So we've been working on these issues with the UN system for quite some time, making sure that we are dealing, that all the development programs have aggregate, segregated gender data. So we are able to track progress in terms of women. And at the same time, we're funding a lot of program on the education of women, sexual and reproductive rights, which is an area where I have to say I'm very pleased to see the U.S. come back to. That we were not like-minded with the previous administration on sexual reproductive rights to disadvantage women around the world. So now the U.S. is back funding those activities again with UNICEF and many other agencies. So there's only less than 10 years left for the Agenda 2030. And this COVID-19 has really, really, I think, created an additional challenge for gender equality. So we're going to have to redouble our efforts in this area. And so Canada now is taking stock of how we can build back better and maybe make sure that we're able to make up for that lost time and get girls back into school and at the decision-making table, which is the other issue when you look at who are making the decisions now during the pandemic. Women are disproportionately or over, I don't know how to say it more properly, but are not sufficiently represented at the table of decision making. And as a result, I hate to say it, but not all decisions being made are the right ones. I think we represent over half of the world's population. We have a different perspective to bring to the table that would inform better decision making. And it still continues to sadden me that even at the UN, but on the world stage, there's so few women leaders that are at those tables, and we have a long way to go.
That's a critically important observation, and I think certainly, even domestically, I've our colleagues who work on domestic violence and sort of interpersonal violence. It's sort of been such a huge uptick when people are, forced to sort of not have a place of refuge or to go, and so I think that just compounds. Are there other, I guess, other perspectives from panelists, either from Mr. Dimopoulos or Ambassador Abreu on the Sustainable Development Goals?
Well, first of all, thank you, Louise, for your comments. And I would like to say something positive amid so many bad news sometimes, is that the new Director General of WTO, it's a lady, a great economist from Nigeria. So this is something to celebrate. It's the first time a woman is elected as Director General, WTO's Director General, and it's the first time Africa elects also an official to this key position in WTO. So that's something very positive. And let me see. The question regarding SDGs implies that some SDGs should be prioritized over others. This idea is not totally compatible with the spirit of the 2030 Agenda, actually, which explicitly states that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the 169 targets are integrated and, the right word, indivisible. This understanding stems from the idea that the 3 dimensions of sustainable development must be implemented in a balanced manner, as I mentioned before, economic, social, and environmental. In the case of Brazil, the SDGs are directly linked to our development strategy. Thus, Brazil remains fully committed to implementing the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs in their entirety. This agenda calls for deep transformations in all of our societies, developing countries alike, so as to achieve all 3 dimensions of sustainable development. They must, be implemented together. Actually, just a handful of developed countries fulfill their commitment to allocate 0.7% of the GDP for overseas development assistance. Regarding the role of diplomacy, well, diplomacy and multilateralism were the instruments through which the agreement on the 2030 agenda by consensus became possible. But not only by consensus, but not only during the negotiations did diplomacy play an important role. Nowadays, diplomacy has also been a key role in the follow-up of the implementation of the 2030 agenda and it keeping its political momentum, especially through the annual sessions of the high-level political forum on sustainable development. It meets annually under the United Nations Economic and Social Council, known as ECOSOC, at the ministerial level, and every 4 years under the UN General Assembly at the level of heads of state and government. Yes, the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed and exacerbated numerous vulnerabilities in our societies that relate to all three dimensions of sustainable development. They may actually, these vulnerabilities may reverse years of progress on the SDGs. And we're now less than a decade to achieve the 2030 agenda and its 17 goals in perhaps a more challenging scenario than the one in which member states first adopted the 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to turn to Mr. Dimopoulos. I have a question that's coming in to me, and one I was thinking about before, and I'd like to pivot. And Theodore, this really speaks to your background as well, in particular. But one of the things that you know, I know certainly from the U.S. Perspective in the defense community, for instance, in the security studies space, the issue of climate change has increasingly come up as something that will drive conflict, that will drive instability, that will, you know, be recast not only as sort of an ecological issue, but one that will really have some pretty serious implications for security, international security and stability. So I'd like to ask, you know, for you, Theodore, to kind of take the discussion, you know, we've been having along the lines of climate change and kind of cast that into how you see and you know, how you see that linked to broader implications with regard to security.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I will try to keep it short because we don't have much time left, and I want to leave time to other panelists as well. Thank you for these questions. I love such questions. Due to climate change, I will not try to go too deep into it, but climate change hides also, we can say, some asymmetrical threats or hybrid threats as well in a sense. And we can see, yes, the osmotic effect of climate change and security threats. For example, I will give just this example. It's climate change and water security, which has to do with access to potable water as well as transborder use of rivers and who has rights. We can see that there are stripes in the Great Renaissance Dam that where the Nile flows with, I think, 11 countries being implicated on this, and how they can use equal access to water without one having all rights on the river, depriving others from that. We also have, due to extended droughts, for example, in some poorer countries, like in Somalia, for example, we see due to extended drought and lack of potable and access to water, we can see an osmotic effect when people driven by poverty and hunger, unable to find food and water, they have joined the ranks of terrorist organization Al-Shabaab in order to find a living. It might sound a little bit far-fetched, but it is true and it exists. And there are more such examples, like, for example, the Mekong River example about water distribution, the Tigris and Euphrates example in the Middle East. But water, speaking specifically about water wars or water security, that it is a byproduct of especially these days of climate change, it will not lead especially to conflict. Rather, it gives an initiative for increased cooperation out of this. So all those, let's say, disputes, river disputes and stuff, they can actually become a vehicle of cooperation, of regional cooperation, for a total comprehensive approach and dealing with water scarcity and climate change. So it can actually help in the end. Thank you for this question.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really important one. Recognizing that we're coming up on time, there's a really great question that I want to ask everyone, each of you, to think about and respond to in maybe 1 to 2 minutes, so we can, it's a tricky question, but I think it's really important. My colleague Ryan Carlin writes, foreign policy is often influenced by domestic politics. The U.S. is currently riven with political and social polarization fueled by social media, misinformation, racial division, economic inequality, and so on. Brazil and Greece have also fairly polarized polities currently or in recent years, Canada to a lesser extent. So the question is, does polarization in both the US and your countries pose a challenge, do you think, to the bilateral relationships? And if so, how? And are there particular areas where that may be the case? And this is one that I think a lot of us in the who work in this sort of space where we look at polarization, see how it impacts things. But I'd love to get your take on that. So if everyone can take just a minute or two, we can hear from. Please, Carlos, go ahead.
Thank you. That's a very interesting and intriguing question, indeed. But I remember when I was at the university in Brazil back in the 70s, late 70s, Brazil was still a dictatorship. And I thought that democracy would be like a magic wand, like this, and everything would turn right. We would have immediately, our institutions strong and working well, and the check and balances system in place. Of course, that democracy is, as has been said by nobody less than Churchill, is the worst system there is, except all others. But one thing really is that from my point of view, freedom of speech is so important, really. I did not have it when I was younger, so value it every day. But, and one more thing, in democracy, and that I learned too, I thought that my candidate would always win, but that's not the case. And actually, there's the principle of rotation of power. So on average, about half of the time, will you be frustrated with the results? But here's the thing. We need to work together, find middle ground, cross the aisle, come together as a nation to make things work, because this is what a democracy is about. Of course okay, we won't always win the election, but one thing the democracy process may, let's say, produce with time is freedom of speech, freedom of press, rule of law, an independent judiciary, an organized opposition, a check and a balancing system in place, which is crucial, but that comes with time. In my line of business, I don't know if Louise and Theodoros would agree, we need to be patient, yes, but also positive and optimistic.
Thank you. Louise, what about from your perspective? And on this issue of polarization?
Well, I think part of your premise is correct. Definitely, we are living now in a world where people can isolate themselves inside an echo chamber and choose to follow only news outlets that mirrors their own preconceived or their own opinion, and so you're never really getting the other side of the coin, and you're not getting a balanced view. So that is definitely happening. We have seen it play out very much here in the United States, but I think it would be a mistake to say that this is not happening in Canada or elsewhere in the world. So that is definitely an issue that we have to politicians, but also it's not just the responsibility of elected officials; it's all of our collective responsibility to try to make sure that we are as balanced as possible in our views. So that being said, politics is politics. It's a pendulum. It swings. And certainly in the United States, if you look at it now, even though you could say that the United States is divided almost pretty much in the center, so you're getting different branch of governments at the moment. Obviously, the Democrats are leading the two main branch of government, but if you look at the state level, you have the last election, actually, the Republicans gained, if I'm not mistaken, 3 states. So you're getting different representation in different places, and then you can bring it all the way down to city and level. So I think that I think for us as diplomats working in the United States, we have to be able to speak to both sides in a productive manner, because if they're not in power now in their respective jurisdiction, they will be again, chances are. So it's been my experience that it's often difficult sometimes to get to those that are in those positions now because they're so busy. But if you have developed relationship over time leading up to their being in those positions, you have somebody that's elected that are going to make informed decision about things like Buy America, which we hope is not going to rear its ugly head again. But so it's difficult to educate, if I can use that terminology, those that have already established such strict preconceived notions about things. So as diplomats, and I'm sure my colleagues do the same thing, we crisscross, at least we used to, and we will again, the states where we are posted to make sure that we have these conversation at the grassroots level, at the municipal level, at the state level, and then on and so on and so forth. There are people I was speaking to 5 years ago who weren't elected, and they are now sitting at the Senate. So I'm glad that I had those conversations about the Canada-U.S. relationship with them at that time, because now they hopefully still remember. So I think it's important to be able to have very, very positive engagement with both sides, and for us as diplomats not to get caught up in local politics. It is not our role to do that. But it can be a little bit tricky from time to time. So we have to thread that very carefully.
Great, thank you. And Theodore, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I agree. As Greeks, as a Greek, we have a long history of polarization, unfortunately, in our society that dates it's millennia old. But Speaking as diplomats, I agree with both ambassadors Blay and Abreu, because we also had a dictatorship, for example, in my country in the 70s, stretching from 67 to 74. And speaking as diplomats, we serve the interests of the state. We serve the interests of each government, whatever government we have, we should serve it. So polarization mainly, I think, according to my opinion, refers to short-term objectives, that we want something to happen in this way now, but the interests of the whole country, the interests of the whole state stretch in the in a long-term basis. So unfortunately, it affects polarization relations, but it should not. And when we're not being taught from examples and that we had in the past, we will most likely pay the price of it. So it is, I think, an intertwining that can become dangerous between polarization and populism. So we should strive to eliminate it and common sense to prevail. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And on that note, we've hit our time today. So I want to thank you, Mr. Dimopoulos, Ambassador Abreu, Ambassador Blay, for sharing your time with us today for this really enriching discussion and informative, and giving us a lot to think about. What we will do is this afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock, have a continuation of some of the points that were raised here, and to think about how we can respond and work with and really kind of carry on that conversation. We'd really also like to thank our audience. It's great to see so many people here joining us for this. The session's also recorded, so it'll be available on our YouTube channel soon. And so we'll share that link. It's in the chat box now, and we'll make it publicly available. But again, on behalf of all of us in the Atlanta Global Studies Center and our centers at Georgia State University, to everyone who was instrumental in putting this together. I mentioned names at the beginning of the session, so I won't do that again, but I want to really just acknowledge everyone's help and participation, in particular Diana Wren-Rapp and Shebnem Oskan from the Atlanta Global Studies Center, who really were instrumental in putting this all together. And thank you all for being here. It's an honor, and I say that it's an honor to be able to have this conversation, and a privilege, and we don't take it lightly. So we really appreciate your time, and wish you well, and we'll be in touch.